Hello and welcome. Agriculture has consistently been on page one for the past few months. We have seen farm bills being passed in the parliament, farmers protesting in large numbers around Delhi and in other states too. To talk about all this and more, today we have with us veteran journalist, author of the path-breaking book, Everybody Loves a Good Drought, and Magsaysay awardee, P. Sainath. Sir, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
So, back in 2016 as well, agriculture made headlines for a different reason though. The central government had set a target of doubling the farmers' income by 2022. What, according to you, should have been the approach to make this ambitious goal realistic?
The first thing I recall is that they declared they would double farmers' incomes by 2022 without once clarifying whether they meant a doubling of nominal income or real income. Now, if it's nominal income, everybody's incomes would double by 2022. If it's real income, calculated real income, that is a very huge task. And it's very clear that as of now, if there is any difference, the difference in real income actually suggests to me a marginal fall, not even stagnation. I don't see that there has been nobody, not even the government, claims they are anywhere close to that target. So I'm saying that this is like 100 other announcements made which really mean nothing. I think that the claim of doubling farmers' income was particularly cruel, considering what the incomes of farmers are and what the farmers are actually going through. So, for instance, suppose you take one of the media criticisms of the protesters and the government and the think tanks and all these completely compromised intellectuals is that all these people protesting at the borders of Delhi, they're all rich farmers from Haryana and Punjab. Has any one of them told you once what is the income of a farmer from Punjab and Haryana? The total monthly income of a farm household in the Punjab, including income from all sources, not just from cultivation, is 18,059 rupees for a household of 5.24. That means the average per capita monthly income of the Punjab farmer is 3,450 rupees. That is lower than the lowest pay in the organized sector.
And you also said on various platforms that it is a civilizational crisis.
Yeah. I maintained always that what started as an agricultural crisis became an agrarian crisis. By agrarian, the difference of which many people and many journalists unfortunately don't appreciate is that agrarian is not the same as agriculture. When we talk about agriculture, we're talking about cultivators, we're talking about farmers, and farm laborers at the best. When you're talking about agrarian, there are millions of livelihoods of people who are not cultivators, but whose occupations are dependent on agriculture. When agriculture entered a crisis, weavers started committing suicide. The first market of the traditional weaver is the farmer and the farm laborer. If they go bankrupt, what does the weaver have? The first major wave of suicides after the reforms began was Pochampalli weavers of Andhra Pradesh. Before you read about any major farmers' suicides. That is that interdependency of the agrarian structure. So then what happens further is that once this begins to happen, the distress is widespread. I have maintained that for the last 10 years, that what we used to call the agrarian crisis has gone far beyond the agrarian. It became a societal crisis as section after section of society was affected. I would then say that in the last few years, I think you can call it a civilizational crisis, because the largest body of small farmers in the world are struggling for their survival. I also want to say one thing, it's more than an economic crisis or a political crisis. What we call the agrarian crisis is also a profoundly moral crisis, demanding that we take positions on where we stand.
In 2009, there was a similar crisis. The UPA government had passed, or the GEAC had passed, PT Brinjal for commercial cultivation. Then there was huge resistance. And UPA government handled it in a different way.
Totally.
There were consultations. But the current government's response to farmer protest, I think it is a continuation of a set pattern that we have seen in recent years.
I think that the crisis in the agrarian sectors has been on since we embraced a particular path of development, which begins with the UPA, with the United Progressive Alliance. Hundreds of thousands of farmers who committed suicide did so when the UPA was in power, but you will find state-wise, whichever of the governments is in power, it continues the crisis. However, what the difference that the last 6 years has made is that I believe that in economics, the NDA is the UPA on steroids. Let's take your own example, the BT Brinjal. Two things happened subsequently. One, the states were consulted. Agriculture is a state subject. Jairam Ramesh sought the opinion of the states, and all the states and union territories gave an opinion. Overwhelmingly, they said, don't touch BT Brinjal. Kerala came with the suggestion, 50 years moratorium. Okay? When that kind of response came in, the UPA said, no, we are not going ahead with this. We are not giving permission to it. That was one. They did many stupid things, but they withdrew from that. The second thing that happened a few years later was that because of the protests over the GEAC and its behavior and the threat of bringing GM into food crops, Aruna Rodrigues moved the Supreme Court of India, and the Supreme Court set up the highest powered scientist group in the country. And they produced a report unanimously saying, have a moratorium on GMBT. Do not introduce it in food crops. It is an extremely dangerous path to pursue. It needs a lot more research and study before you do any such thing. So I think that, yes, I think that the economic policies in agriculture, there is a continuity. There is a continuity between the two governments. But the political response of the state, what consultation was there? In the BT Brinjal, the states were asked. Here, the laws are unconstitutional because agriculture is listed as a state subject. No state was consulted before these laws were declared. First, they were brought as ordinances in June 5. Second, let alone the state governments being consulted, Parliament was not consulted. Their demand in Parliament was put it to a standing committee on agriculture, put it to a special committee, let the laws be studied. No, they didn't consult them. They didn't consult their own BJP governments in the states. They didn't consult their own cabinet. The only people who knew what was coming in those laws was the corporate world.
So this also means that they undermined the federal structure of our democracy.
With the GST, I think already federalism went back 50 years because states surrendered the one source of major revenue of sales tax, they surrendered that. Now you have said that agriculture, we are going to do what we want on agriculture, states be damned. You are doing a terrible centralizing, you're rolling back 50 years of states' rights, states' autonomy. In fact, you've dissolved one state called Jammu and Kashmir. So, if that is not an attack on federalism, what is?
There is a general perception that this is more to do with MSP and the APMCs, and that the southern states particularly are not supporting the protests.
Whether in Andhra Pradesh, in Rayalaseema, in Maharashtra, in Kerala, there have been very large turnouts of farmers saying we are with Delhi's farmers. The best way of understanding that APMC, please know that farmers have been demanding the reform of the APMC for 30 years. It's not that someone is coming with reform and they are resisting. The question is, reforms for whom? For the community or for the corporations? What you have done is ramp through reforms for the corporations, who are the only people who were consulted in this process. Now, let me look at it one more way and you'll understand what that APMC thing is. Government schools are very flawed, very terrible, but with all the problems, and then in government schools, we are very happy if they have a proper blackboard. Why don't we shut them down? A, because for tens of millions of children, it is the only chance of having anything approaching an education. 2, for crores of Indian children, the government school is the only place in the world they get one decent meal a day for 5 days. If we shut down government schools, children will starve, as during the lockdown, physical shutdown of the schools, malnourishment went up in all the places where government schools were situated. Okay, so let's put it this way. The government school is the APMC of the education sector. The district hospital or the PHC is the APMC and Mandi of the health sector. The APMC is the government school of the agrarian sector. That's why you don't call for its shutting down.
We have seen many rural sector boards like the handicrafts board, handloom board being shut during the pandemic, that too.
Correct.
Does that mean that there is no hope for rural livelihoods?
There is no hope with these policies. There is no hope. There are many things that can happen. And by the way, your viewers and readers should know how serious that move of shutting down those boards is. The point was to improve the boards. The point was to improve in a direction that serves the purpose of the handloom and handicrafts. And one of the things that I'm sure very few of your readers and viewers know, handicrafts and handlooms are the second biggest employer in India after agriculture. No industry. No, these are your MSMEs and tiny entrepreneurs. Handicrafts and handlooms employ a hell of a lot more, millions more people than the IT sector of your electronic city employees. Despite that, we're just destroying it. We are creating the way for a corporate takeover of everything. There is no hope for those policies, and you will be foolish to rest your hopes in a government that pursues those. Is there hope outside of that? Oh yes, there is plenty.
Okay, but also, sir, some of the policies, the government might have introduced it in the right right vision or or the right intention too. But what happens over a period of time, it turns counterproductive.
The way to hell was paved with good intentions. The thing, this right, I don't agree with this right intention. There's a whole path of development, and these policies are consistent with that path of development.
Yeah.
As long as you are on that path of development, you will have these policies. Okay? You are going towards corporate farming. Ultimately, your agrarian crisis, let me define it for you in 5 words. Corporate hijack of Indian agriculture. The process by which that is achieved is predatory commercialization of the countryside. 5 words. The result, the outcome of that, 5 words, greatest displacement in our history. So it is a whole, it's not one policy or this policy good, that policy bad. It's a whole phalanx. What agriculture do you want? Do you want community-led agriculture or corporate-led agriculture? The UPA, the NDA, all of them have opted to go with corporate-led agriculture. The UPA thought that it can do both.
Sir, a bit of journalism now. It's been 25 years since you wrote Everybody Loves a Good Drought. What has changed since then in development and in journalism, or in rural sector and journalism?
I think that journalism, there was a brief hope for it in the late 90s, early 2000s. I think that, what we have discussed for the last half an hour on agriculture is very true of journalism. What has happened in the last 30 years is the corporatization of media. Right? At the time of independence, you had thousands of newspapers, magazines with thousands of owners. Yeah. Your own revered freedom fighter, 102-year-old Doraiswamy, he also ran a newspaper, his own hand-published, I don't remember the name, it's in Kannada. Everybody who had an ideal, an idealism, an idea, could start something and do it. Now, since the late 80s, since the mid 80s, corporate control has meant that half a dozen corporations, a few big business houses, control the bulk of circulation, whether online, print, television, right? Now here, let me connect you directly to media and the farm crisis. Richest Indian in India and the world, Mukesh Ambani. Richest and biggest owner of media in India, Mukesh Ambani. Network 18, he doesn't know how many TV channels he owns. He can't name them. I could probably name them for him. Yeah, but he doesn't know. He owns so many channels he doesn't know. Yeah, now, and those channels and newspapers he does not own, he is very often the biggest advertiser. So please see the conflict of interest there. Biggest beneficiary of the farm laws, Mukesh Ambani, right? And now the newspapers, channels, portals, magazines owned by Mr. Ambani, are they going to ever be truthful and honest about the farmer? On the other hand, the government that is in cooperation with Mr. Ambani, they also do a lot of media advertising. So both government, state and corporations are together. The media is owned by one or dependent on the other. So by and large, the media are acting as what they are. They're acting as ideological ambassadors or as, drum beaters for the corporate world. That's who they are. In the last 30 years, we reduced journalism to a revenue stream. Your problem across all these sectors is corporate takeover of your country, your nation, your society.
Thank you very much, sir.
Welcome.
Thank you for taking the time to share your views with us and the insights. Hope
Thank
to
you.
have another conversation sometime soon.